Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 2 in our series on the design of everyday things by Don Norman.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Hey, Matt. It's going pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I don't know. What's going on in your world? I feel like because of the nature of our back and forth, I just have to come up with something arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much going on. I just bought a new synthesizer, which I'm excited about getting in the mail. I'm going to play with it.
Yeah. Okay. What, I don't know, what kind of beats do you like to drop?
It's interesting because I feel like the type of beats I like to drop are not necessarily the type of music I would ordinarily listen to.
Okay.
I like doing things like, I don't even know what this type of music is called. Almost not Avicii. I'm a huge fan of Avicii, by the way. But like EDM maybe, like very kind of techno, acid, heavy bass, and which it's weird because I just don't listen to this type of music ever. It's not that I don't like it. I mean, I like all music, but it's just, I think when I'm producing music, I like to produce computery sounding music, and that just sounds computery to me.
Yeah, is this like when all you have is a synthesizer, every problem looks like
I think
electronic music?
I think it is. I think it's also a direct, like, because I grew up playing piano and playing classical music, which I absolutely love. I can play Chopin for hours, but I think it's almost like I want to do the complete opposite of that. But just because
rebelling against your youth.
Kind of rebelling, kind of a broadening of the horizons type of thing. Trying to tackle something that I just have no experience in.
Let me ask you this. When you are laying a fat beat, how do you kind of evaluate whether or not you succeeded in your task?
That's another interesting thing about me is like, I'm very much... You know that thing about the pottery where you make 100 pots and you throw them all away because they're all crappy, but maybe there's like one good one.
Yeah,
I'm like that, except I don't have a good one. Like I'm all about producing. To me, producing is the thing that I'm focused on, and like examining the kind of comparative quality is not it's not a main focus, which probably means I'll never be like a good music producer, but that's not the goal either. Like, it's just for fun.
It's for fun.
So yeah, I basically just make a bunch of stuff and kind of it all just goes into the ether.
Okay. That was a maybe overly subtle attempt at transitioning to the book, because he talks about execution and evaluation. Obviously maybe we can toss some of your beats into this episode, but anyway, because I think that there actually is some interesting, things to talk about there, like with a synthesizer.
Yes.
It's like, obviously there's a lot going on. So,
there's
it sounds like a hard design challenge.
I mean, talking about, because the gulf of execution is the one where you're trying to figure out how it operates, right? Where you have a goal. Maybe my goal is to produce some kind of like fat, like distorted, blarg type sound. Figuring out how to actually execute that on this synthesizer, I think, is going to be tricky, because this thing is called an Arturia Mini Freak, by the way, in case people want to know the exact thing. And I have not had a chance to play with it myself. I haven't received it yet, but I've watched like YouTube videos, and it looks like a somewhat of a difficult thing to use. So I think there's going to be that gulf of execution is going to be pretty wide for me.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting point, because I feel like in that situation, you know, like if we're talking about his framework that he's setting up in this chapter, he talks about, you know, you have a goal, and the goal of execution is just like you're saying, like just planning out, okay, what series of actions do I need to perform?
Right.
And if this thing is just presenting you with a matrix of buttons, of like white buttons, it might not be clear at all what
Yes.
you know, what series of actions you need to lay down to do that. So
this is something where every once in a while when we're reading these books, I get these strong realizations that like this happened to me in my like career or whatever, and I just didn't realize it at all. And now that I'm seeing it in words, because he talks about these 7 stages. You know, you have a goal, you plan, specify an action sequence, you perform those actions, you perceive the result, you interpret, which I can't remember what that means, and then compare, where you're comparing the actual outcome of your actions to the goal that you had.
right.
And this is such a thing that happens in microcosm in software engineering. And this is probably goes without saying even, but like software engineering is all goal based. I mean, you're trying to write some code that moves some bits from point A to point B. Early in my career, I would always plan the wrong series of actions basically, and then I would carry those out. My code would be buggy. You know, I would compare in the form of a unit test. My unit tests would fail, and I would kind of go back to the drawing board. And in this chapter, he discusses how if you're an expert, which is a word I hesitate to use about my own ability, but like if you're better at something, those planning and specifying stages almost start to disappear.
Yeah.
And you just become kind of automatic about it. And, you know, certainly not everything in my career is that way, but much more often than earlier in my career, where it's kind of like I have a goal and I can almost just, you know, it's like I don't even think about, you know, the execution part of the goal. Like it's just natural. Just that whole thing of reading about something that has happened to you in the past and being like, oh, like that's what was happening. I find that fascinating.
It is cool because he's talking about a user using something that you're creating, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like the user has a goal and you have to think about their journey through these phases. But it's so general. It can apply to literally everything you do in your life.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because one thing I was thinking about during this part was animals and how I've noticed, I mean, I love animals and I've observed a lot of animal behavior. I mean, I almost wish I had gone into a career that was like completely animal focused sometimes, just because I just get this glee out of like anything animal related. But it made me think about like, you know, squirrels, which are a creature that you see them all the time. They plan something and they just kind of fail miserably. Like they'll try to jump from one branch to another and just legit fall and you know, whatever. It's not a big deal to them because they're acrobats. But then there's other animals that every action they take seems so like deft and perfect. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's just because I haven't seen them make mistakes or whatever. But like a spider, for instance, it's not like you ever see a spider. It just seems like everything they do is so perfectly instinctual. And because I think it is. This is kind of, you know, I'm leading myself to my own conclusion. But yeah, I think some animals are just kind of born with that expertise and they don't have to go through this phase of like learning to become an expert. Spiders are just born with this expertise in trapping animals in their webs.
Right.
Squirrels, on the other hand, have to kind of learn how to be great Cirque du Soleil participants.
Interesting. Okay, but actually, I think we maybe skipped the kind of intro part of this, where we just talk about what the chapter was. I want to get back to that. So just to call it out, this is chapter 2 of Design of Everyday Things.
This is the Pulp Fiction of podcasts, where we just do the middle first.
In media res. All right, boom. Where you just open on the scene in the action. But anyway, this chapter is called The Psychology of Everyday Actions. Mm-hmm. And so our plan here is we're going to actually break this chapter into two episodes. So for this first one, we're just going to talk more about what we've been talking about, the gulf of, crossing this chasm, the gulf of execution, the gulf of evaluation, right? And then he talks a lot in this chapter about blame, actually, and like almost the psychology of when things go wrong. So I think we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah, which is a fascinating topic for us, I think, because software is an area where blame can be so obvious seeming, but also so not what you think it is. But
also,
anyway, that's
there's
a
just
teaser.
we'll talk about that. A teaser for the next episode.
Yeah.
So I want to get right back into what you were just talking about with the spider. I think this dovetails directly with one of the things that he talks about in this chapter, which is the 3 levels of processing. He has the visceral, the behavioral, and the reflective. And so I think what you're basically getting at is that spiders are kind of operating at this visceral level.
Yeah.
Like there's very little processing. There's no learning. They just kind of come into the world with this ASIC, this like application specific integrated circuit of like, okay, if I have this input, I do this thing. And there's there's no worrying about behaviors or training or what have you. They just kind of, but this is the thing. I think maybe I don't know. Do spiders learn? I'm curious.
Well, this is something I've always found so fascinating about spiders is I think for a human, it's easy to understand kind of an instinctual behavior. Like it's easy to understand this kind of like you receive input and you perform some action as a direct result. Like, maybe ants, they just seem easier to understand. It's like, they pick up on a pheromone and they follow it. Spiders, on the other hand, are performing a complex task, like building a web and trapping things.
Right.
And then, whatever else they do, like eating them and stuff. I can sort of understand, just like I can read a book that tells me that this is all instinctual, but it's so hard to like, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. It just seems like
feels
such a
like
complex...
too high order of processing to be.
Yes, exactly.
Innately, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like something the spider mother, would have to like teach all her trillion little children that are like creepily hanging out on her back.
It is interesting because it feels like there's 2 dimensions here. It's like the complexity and whether or not it can change, and like the flexibility and the learning.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, could you wind up with a system that's incredibly complex that can do these amazing things, but it's impossible to change?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're just born with this, it's immutable. They can do this crazy thing, but it's not, maybe like, for example, like a player piano.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's kind of a good example where it's like, it would be sometimes a player piano can play something that a human could not even play. It's an impressive accomplishment, but
it has no flexibility. It's kind of like an analog ML chip where you take like a machine learning model and like print it onto a chip. It's like what it's performing is the result of this tremendous amount of calculation and kind of pre-training, but it's not like it can get better at that.
Change.
Yeah, it's stuck in that, ML model.
Is that something people are doing? Like they train a model and then they design a hardware chip around the like weights that was in that model?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I honestly can't remember where I saw it. It was probably like a YouTube video, but this is like a somewhat new technology and one that's of great interest because obviously, well, actually not obviously, running a machine learning model takes a tremendous amount of computational resources. And, anyone who might have worked with them knows this. Like, you can have tons of graphics cards devoted to doing all of this floating point arithmetic. But if you can print that information to a chip and have those biases and node values be stored as electrical signals, say in like a capacitor, it's free. You basically get this tremendous amount of computation for absolute free. You can run a chip for a tiny amount of electricity. So it's and there's obviously the trade-offs that we just discussed. Like once you print the chip, it's stuck at those values, and you can't do anything further with it. But there's awesome possibilities. I mean, you can imagine training some amazing ML model to pick up, human bodies that are walking across a crosswalk, printing it to an extremely, electrically efficient chip and putting that in a vehicle or something. And yeah, just a really cool technology.
It's just so hard to sit where we are today and imagine what, because that sounds like an interesting evolution, but it's like it could also be this total dead end, like maybe that's not at all how things are going to evolve. And I think it's really hard to say from where we are right now, like how it is going to evolve. Because right now, I guess with ChatGPT and everything, it just looks like the cutting edge is just around making these models like 50 trillion parameters big, at ever increasing training costs. But I think I've heard that, there's some skepticism that will ever lead to improvements in certain areas like truth, like the ability to, have consistent outputs.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I almost want to dive deeper into this.
But maybe we table that for right now, because I don't want to get too far off of the topic of this chapter. But
yeah, one thing I did want to go back to, actually, that you were talking about before we kind of went on this ML tangent. I thought the fact of the chapter, which was this very throwaway line, was him talking about how most of human behavior is subconscious. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize, or they don't think about. Most of what everyone does in their day-to-day is that kind of spider, you're receiving input and you're performing some action as a result. You're not deeply thinking about most of these actions. And I think that, and the reason I want to kind of go deeper on this is because I think people think of humans as this amazing, reasoning being, Homo sapien, they're hyper intelligent, they reason about everything that they do. But that's just not the case at all. Most of what every human does, even the quote unquote smartest human on earth, they're just doing all of this subconscious processing and making these really quick gut decisions about everything. There's a really good book called Thinking Fast and Slow that was about this. And I love that book because it has several examples that you can kind of do yourself. Some of them were just simple, I wish I could remember them. I should have looked them up for this podcast, but they're basically these thought exercises that you can do as you're reading, and you realize how your brain just jumped to a conclusion, even though that that's what he's trying to do to you. You still do it, and it's annoying, but it's also just mind-blowing and illuminating, because you realize that you're not thinking deeply. You are jumping to conclusions.
He has examples of this in this chapter, right? He has there's the three. He has three capitals or four capitals. What's the capital of Wales? What's the capital of Estonia? What's the capital of the United States? And what's the capital? Was that it? There might have been one more.
Brazil, maybe.
Brazil, right? And then his point is when you're asked all those questions, you immediately you're either I know that or I don't, kind of. There's just this very quick thing. And then the other one that he asked was, which side of the door was the entry doorknob on in your house 3 houses ago?
Right.
And I spent time to try to think. It took a while, and it's crazy. If you think 3 houses ago, that's multiple life experiences. So I was back in London, and I think I know which side of the door it was on, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
Dude, that whole part made me realize that the handle is not always on the right side. I think I just have this weird because
it can't always be on the right side, right?
Of course not, because you could be. This is what's so dumb. I almost didn't want to admit this, but my brain immediately was like, oh, he's trying to trick me. The handle's always on the right side. But
I
obviously,
considered that, yeah.
if you're on the other side of a door where the handle's on the right side, the handle is on the left side. This is how reality and physics works.
I mean, that's a flaw of doors. We should make it so that every door can always... It dynamically assesses which side of the door you're on, and then
Yes.
the hinge only operates.
the hinge has to move to the other side.
Yeah.
And if two people come to each side of the door, it just breaks.
I think mine was on the left. Although it is interesting because I guess you could maybe entry doors to residences would always be on one side.
In my experience, entry doors have always put the handle on the right side. Like every house or apartment that I have lived in, the entry handle was on the right side.
How about this? In London, a common thing to do is to have just a gigantic knob right in the middle
Oh, that I
of
love.
the door.
Because that actually fixes that whole problem we were just talking about.
To get back, we keep on fighting. We're fighting to cover
Yeah,
the
very
topic
tangent.
of this. You called this out. You the list of the 7 steps of goal accomplishment, essentially. So you have the goal, you plan, you specify, you perform it. You actually do the things. The world kind of responds. You perceive what's happening as a result. You interpret what those perceptions mean, and then you determine whether or not you accomplished it. Well, there's this neat mapping that he has in between the layers of that. If you're thinking, as you're going down towards like doing the goal, like to the steps that you're actually performing, you're going through the layers of cognition. So when you're planning, you're using that like reflective layer. You're really considering how you would accomplish that. Behavioral, it's like, okay, this is you're translating that plan into the series of steps. Mm-hmm. And then visceral is explicitly like these completely subconscious actions that, like the muscle twitches in your fingers.
Yeah.
And then it goes kind of back the other way, where it's like you're perceiving, it's like literally the raw sensory information you interpret. And now interpretation versus comparison, I think that's those two are like a little bit fuzzier to me. Like maybe the line is like a little bit blurrier there.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, do you recall what interpret meant? Because compare, you're comparing the outcome, what actually happened, to the goal that you had.
A super simple example, like you want to, like if pushing a button performs some action, but you can't see like inside a box or something, but there's like an LED on the outside of the box. So like you push it, a little time passes and then like the LED blinks on or what have you. It is literally like the light, the sensory information of the light. Like behavioral is like, like understanding that, okay, the LED went on. And then like finally the kind of compare is like, okay, did the light going on actually translate into what my goal actually was?
No, I think it's just that interpret and compare, there's a lot of overlap. And yeah. I also think like it's because I think of simple actions like trying to open a door. And I think for trying to open a door, you see that the door opens, and interpret and compare are like kind of the same thing.
Identical, yeah.
Which I think interpret and compare probably come into play for much more complex actions. And he talks about this a little bit where, I mean, this might be somewhat of a unrelated thing, but like he talks about how people want to make a hole in the wall. And he was like, no, you got to take a step back. They don't actually want to make a hole in the wall. They want to hang a shelf. And how like, I don't know, I guess this kind of works as an onion where you have a goal which consists of many, many tinier goals.
I really love that he called this out because I feel like I haven't seen it much. Every goal is actually a hierarchy of goals.
Right.
It's all nested under some larger goal, and then you kind
which
of...
Which is death.
I think, which is the goal is death.
Yeah.
Well, I hope not.
I mean, that's where we're all going, right? If you really take a step back.
The funny thing is I think most people don't really... Maybe this is condescending. I think most people don't like aren't thinking about the uppermost level, because I think it all gets really abstract and like it's like to define a meaning for yourself, or like to live a meaningful life.
Well, we're not
It's like,
all,
what does that mean?
We're not all planning for the inevitable heat death of the universe. All of my actions are playing into the heat death of the universe.
Are you trying to bring about the heat death of the universe?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
I don't even think that's possible. Like, is it even possible? Like, I guess by doing things, you increase entropy, right?
I suppose so. So I should really just be like burning as much stuff as I can. So arsonists are the true heroes of the universe.
I think, I think if you could turn the sun into a black hole somehow, I think that would be a good step towards bringing about the heat death.
Okay, I'll start working on that.
All right. Okay. Well, you'll have to let us know how that's going.
You'll know.
Time.
You'll know in 9 minutes. There was a point where he was like, "Wiggle your finger." By the way, when in this chapter, there was a few points where he like asked you to do certain things. Did you do those things?
I think so. Yeah, that the finger example confused me about like what the hell he was trying to demonstrate with that.
Yeah, it did make me feel weird though, because basically he was like, "Wiggle your second finger, now wiggle your third finger," and you did it, and then he was like, "What was different in your brain about performing those two actions?" And it did give me this like funny feeling, because there really wasn't anything in your brain when you're performing these two actions. It was kind of a demonstration of the lizard brain.
I see.
The visceral part of the brain, where it's like you're not. This type of action is not going through your reflective or behavioral layer. It's just completely handled by this like visceral layer, which really you're not even cognizant of. I thought that was super interesting.
That is interesting. So does that mean that are all of those things the plan? Like, are those two goals there together, and then you just do both of them, and then at that point, like, the program is already kind of like in your hand, and you don't even need to do anything in your brain?
I think that's sort of how I understood this. It's like there's certain operations where this 7-stage system kind of collapses, where you just have like plan, or you have a goal, and kind of the entire maybe plan is sort of something that enters into your brain, but like specify, perform, perceive, interpret, it all just kind of collapses into this visceral thing, because once you get good enough at something, the behavioral part collapses into the visceral. And I imagine if you get really, really good at something, then you don't even need to perform as much reflection. So kind of everything, as you improve at a task, or if it's just a fundamental instinctual task, this 7-stage system collapses into the visceral.
Yeah. I think that if you're a skateboarder trying to land a 900 or something, you're just doing that so many times that I think it's almost, you can almost viscerally feel, when you hit it, because it's been so many times. You've almost kind of, it's almost like machine learning training, where it's like you're pushing those down into these more hardened neurons or something.
This is something that impresses me so much about teachers, because like, I've been a software engineer for ages, and I work with folks who are more junior than I am, but I've noticed that I struggle so much to teach them anything, because so much of what I do has been kind of collapsed down into this part of my brain that I don't even really understand, and I can't really pull information out of that part of my brain. But teachers, they've not
transcended.
They have this like meta knowledge of this like 7-stage
the stages of action.
The stages of action, right? Where they can sort of, look at each part of those 7 stages and like help someone else with those parts, those individual parts, which it's a testament to this like higher level knowledge about something. I found that there's this massive difference between like practitioners and teachers. It's just something I was thinking about during this chapter.
Have you heard of this system? It's kind of these 4 phases of competence, where it's unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And I know that like those words are so like similar to one another.
Yeah, it's kind of like every permutation of unconscious and competence.
But what it boils down to is, at first, you don't know what you don't know. You know that you don't know anything. You know that you kind of know how to do it. This is like kind of more with physical tasks, where you're like learning how to ride a bike, right? You don't even know what you're not doing correctly at first. And then the next thing is you kind of know what you're supposed to be doing, but you also can tell that you're not doing it correctly. Right. Then you know what you're supposed to be doing and you can tell that you're doing it right. And then finally, like, you're not even evaluating. You're not even measuring against what you know you should be doing. You're just doing it right, and you're not even thinking about it.
Yeah, right.
And that's the like unconscious competence phase. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, where it's like you've achieved this level of unconscious competence, and then now you almost need to. It's not really a reversion, but like you need to kind of go back to conscious competence, where you explicitly know why what you're doing is the right thing to do. Right.
Which I just find amazing. I mean, having attempted to do that, it's a very difficult thing to do, and I'm impressed by people who can do it.
I guess in the case of software engineering, like there's probably not an explicit conscious competence phase, because it's not like someone is coming at you and being like, this is how to be an engineer. It's like you just worked for 10 years or 20 years in the industry, and you just arrived at unconscious competence because you never spent, like, it wasn't presented to you in this explicit way. Right. And then now, like, you need to kind of figure that out by going back, back one step.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. One other part I really liked about this chapter, and this might be getting into what we want to cover in next one, but I'll mention it anyway. He talks about how cognition provides understanding and emotion assigns value. Mm-hmm. And I found this very interesting for us because I think we work in a career where emotion is like extremely discouraged. Mm-hmm. And any hint of emotion in the decision-making process is basically regarded with like disdain and kind of like immediate dismissal. And it's interesting because I do think that as you get better at something, because I completely agree, in my initial stages of my career, I would feel emotions about certain things and they would be wrong because I was just simply not, there was nuances of problems I didn't understand, or there was, just complexities that I wasn't seeing. But as you go further and further and you see all these situations, you start to develop this intuition, you literally start to see the same situation multiple times with, maybe the names or the places are changed. And you just kind of start to develop an intuition about things. But I think there's still, even in myself, there's this kind of dismissal of my own emotions. And I think that that's something that experts need to understand. It's just like there is a point where you kind of flip back around and you can sort of trust your own emotions sometimes. I mean, you should try to validate them always, but there's a point where your emotions sort of become valuable again. And I thought this was super interesting.
That is very interesting. So it sounds like what you're getting at is, if you say that I have a feeling that this design is going to be X, Y, and Z, people are going to be like, you got to back that up with some numbers. Right. And it's like, there's not always going to be numbers, because it's like how complex the system is, or whether or not complexity is leading to inefficiencies. Those are classically hard things to measure. So, right. I mean, and maybe the way to measure that is I think this is something that you had done, where you get you aggregate people's emotions, and maybe that can become useful, and it becomes
Yes.
a number that engineers can now feel okay about.
Yes, I'm actually a huge fan of hot takes in the aggregate. Like if you have, 2 hot takes, that's not worth anything. But if you have a team of 100 people and you get 85 hot takes and they're all lining up, it's true.
Right, exactly. That's a number that people can make an engineering decision on, I think.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, not for the not for these 7 stages. But I found this material really, really interesting.
Yeah, like I love the exercise of taking the world and like breaking it down into these explicit steps. Even if they're not perfect, breaking them out is a useful exercise, I feel like.
Yeah.
So,
I've never been the type of person that wants to like put things in a taxonomy, but I mean, this sounds silly because I'm like old now and I should have learned this already, but like just the act of like putting words to things is so useful. And like, you see these things that you've actually gone through in your life, and now like, oh, this is the 7 stages, or like, some of this expertise is, move into these different parts of my cognition. And it just, I don't know. I feel like it's just a really useful exercise. And I got the same feeling with the last book as well, where he's just kind of putting words to things. But it makes it easier to talk about them. It makes it easier to understand them.
This makes me think back to that kind of truism, which was something to the effect of planning is invaluable, the plan is worthless. And it's something that takes some time to wrap your head around, because I think it is mostly true. You come up with a plan and then it's never going to be what you actually wind up doing because of the realities of the world. But the process of planning itself is still an incredibly useful exercise that's going to lead to a better outcome. It's this funny paradox, which is like the artifact that gets produced, like it may not wind up being directly useful by itself, but the process that you got to get there was like super useful. So like, even if, like what you're saying, like even if your taxonomy is not very good, the process of distilling it into these groups, like I think that's probably, and maybe it is, maybe you find out that yes, actually this is a really useful taxonomy, but even if it's not, like I think the exercise can still be useful. Was there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, let's call it. I feel like I'm very, I don't know, I'm just leading us down tangents today. That's my thing.
That is quite all right. All right, but this has been awesome. Looking forward to talking about errors.
Oh yeah.
This guy's bread and butter.
Yeah.
He's the king of errors. So
now this next episode is going to be great because this guy has an amazing opinion on engineers that I want to talk to you about.
Yes. All right. Talk to you next time, John.
All right. See you, Matt.